Father Beauregard. Reverend David Beauregard has been a professor of English and Dean of Studies at Our Lady of Grace Seminary in Boston since 1978. For the past 7 years, he has been adjunct professor of church history at St. John's School of Theology in Brighton, Massachusetts. Father Beauregard has published several articles on ethics and on Shakespeare, and he is the author of Virtue's own feature, Shakespeare and Virtue Ethics Edition, and Catholic Theology in Shakespeare's Plays, a book examining Shakespeare's extensive use of Catholic theology. He received his PhD in English literature from the Ohio State University and studied theology in Rome at the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Please join me in welcoming the speaker, Father Beauregard.
Thank you, Michael. I have to amend my talk here. The title actually is, I changed a bit to Building Virtue and Dignity in the Taming of Shrew. So Shakespeare and Catholicism, Building Virtue and Human Dignity in Taming of Shrew. A very simple play, and probably most have seen it or read it. So it's kind of like this play to illustrate my particular approach. So let me begin with an overview, a brief overview. My approach to Catholic Shakespeare does not concentrate on biographical matters needing documentary proof or on historical parallels that would have been picked up by an alert audience. You certainly point to a Catholic Shakespeare. I don't think there's any doubt about that. As convergent probabilities, to use the phrase that Father Millward has taken over from John Henry Newman. And so I want to focus on two things. First of all, the poetical and dramatic program of Shakespeare. That is, first I'll look at what the dramatists were doing in the Elizabethan age, what the program and purpose of drama was. What was the function of drama at that particular time? I'm not talking here about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, but the Renaissance in England. What was the function of drama at this particular time? What was it supposed to accomplish in a social and moral sense? How did it aim to affect the audience? These are the kinds of questions that bear on meaning of the play. I know the plays as well. And secondly, I want to explore the philosophical and theological dimensions which are really embedded in the Taming of Shrew. And here I'll appeal to the importance of Aristotelian philosophy and its Renaissance and Thomistic development. In the realm of Renaissance philosophy, with the recent work of Oscar Costello and Charles B. Schmidt, we've been given a sense of the widespread importance of Aristotelian Thomistic, of the Aristotelian tradition. And moreover, with the recent resurgence of virtue ethics, the ethics of Thomas Aquinas, due to the efforts of Alistair MacIntyre in the secular universities and Father Serge Pincair's in the Catholic sphere, we've been provided with background on appreciation and recovery of the meaning of Shakespeare's plays. I first pronounced the word Pincair's. A nun said, "No, Father, it's Pincair's." And I said, "Oh." And I corrected myself rapidly and gave it a better job. First of all, then I want to argue that the Elizabethan poetic of Sidney, Spenser, and Shakespeare, deriving from certain Italian Aristotelian critics, provides us with a distinctly Roman Catholic take on the plays. By consulting the well-known poetics of Sidney, Spenser, and Shakespeare, we can clearly see the importance of virtue ethics. English Renaissance poets were not exploring ideas or engaging in social criticism. They weren't dealing in statements or exploring things or provoking questions, disorienting imitation. Just this slide here. Art of imitation, and the crucial question is, he says, poetry is an art of imitation, that is, an art of representing, counterfeiting, or figuring forth. And he doesn't explain immediately what that means, so the real crucial question is, well, figuring forth what, imitating what. And the objects of imitation, as he goes on to explain, are the various passions, virtues, and vices. Thus, Sidney says that the painter portrays not the historical Roman matron Lucrece, but rather her virtue of constancy. And he gives a series of concrete illustrations from classical literature alluding to Stoic and Thomistic moral philosophy. Thus, he mentions the Roman Stoics, the medieval schoolmen, and the passions and virtues that they describe. And so in this quotation here, you can see it very well. Anger, the Stoics said, was a short madness, but let Sophocles, the Greek author, review Ajax on the stage killing and whipping sheep and oxen, thinking them the army of Greeks. And tell me if you have not a more familiar insight into anger, finding in the schoolmen, Thomas and his commentators, his genus indifference. See whether wisdom, temperance in Ulysses and Diomedes, valor in Achilles, friendship in Nisus and Euryalus, even to an ignorant man carry not apparent shining. So what they're doing here is showing you shining images that will impress you, images of the virtues, vices, and passions. Edmund Spenser obviously followed Sidney in depicting the moral virtues and the central figures of the Fair Queen, a work intended, as he said, to set forth and express and picture, those are his words, virtues such as holiness in Book 1, the Red Cross Knight is an image of holiness. Gaia in Book 2 is an image of temperance, and deals with other virtues in other books, justice in Book 5, and so on. And as he says, they are set out in Aristotle and the rest. Who's he referring to as the rest? Probably St. Thomas and other commentators on Aristotle. Following Tasso is Jerusalem delivered, Spenser refers to the virtues of a private man, being represented in Tasso's Rinaldo, and the political virtues in his Godfredo. Tasso himself describes his characters, Tancredo and Rinaldo, as representing the concupiscible and irascible appetites. That's a Thomistic phrase, an Aristotelian phrase. And so from the standpoint of a Renaissance reader, if we look at the slide here, Sir John Harrington. Sir John Harrington, in his brief Apology of Poetry, 1591, observes Ariosto's Orlando Furioso that here he's reading a work. What's he looking for? He looks for allegory in this little brief apology, but also, he says, as her apt similitudes, her passions well expressed of love, of pity, of hate, of wrath, a blind man may see, he can but hear, that this work is full of them. So they were looking, readers were looking for these passions. And this makes sense in terms of drama. What we observe with drama, passion, emotion, that's kind of basically the dramatic stuff of plays. And so it's evident that the poets and readers were looking at literary characters as representing, embodying, and expressing virtues, vices, and passions. They were not exploring ideas, as some current critics maintain, not ideas, but images of virtues, vices, and passions. And more to the point, in alignment with this poetic order, and Shakespeare too speaks in these terms of virtue's own feature, that's one phrase, of passionate speech, another phrase he uses, speaking of passion, and playing passions. Hamlet, in speaking of the actor players, defines this conception with some precision. Dennis and I have a course in instruction. by urging the players to be temperate in playing or acting out of passion. Temperance, acting out of passion. No, do not saw the air too much. Don't go to excess in the earth with your hand thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire to get temperance that may give it smoothness. For it bends me to the soul to hear a periwinkle fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags. Be not too tame either. You don't go to the other extreme. Virtue for Aristotle is in the middle way. You don't go to excess, you don't go to efficiency. But let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you overstep not the modesty of nature. Modesty is another term we develop here, but we're short of time. Thus, for the act of the effective mimesis of enacting the passions is a matter of finding Aristotle's virtuous mean between the extremes of excess gesticulation and deficient reserve. Finally, Hamlet's speech continues with a description of the end or purpose of dramatic representation. For anything so overdone is from the purpose of play, whose end, whose aim, whose purpose, both at the first and now, was and is to hold as it were the mirror up to nature. The first key phrase, the mirror up to nature. To show virtue her own feature, the second key phrase, he's showing us the image of a virtue, or scorn or pride, her own image, and the very aged body of the times, form, and pressure. And so the purpose of mimesis here is historically specific, uniting Aristotelian poetics, the notion that the object of mimesis consists of the actions of men, good or bad, and Aristotelian Thomistic moral psychology, particularly by showing images of the virtues, vices, and passions. The Thomistic structure and development of the Aristotelian tradition now enshrined in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Only us Catholics can really read these plays. Stands in the most extensive analysis of ethics or moral philosophy or moral psychology. It begins with the topic of beatitude and happiness and the dignity of the human person, a slight change from the Renaissance. It deals with the concupiscible and irascible passions, and goes on to discuss the theological and moral virtues. And what I shall call attention to then is the strange coincidence here of this structure with Shakespeare's play. In turn, this suggests Shakespeare's knowledge of and embrace of a common fundamental Catholic tradition, together with a host of other Catholic notions. So the dignity of man, to use the Renaissance version of the dignity of the human person, the pursuit of happiness, an Aristotelian notion, the regulation of the passions, and the achievement of virtue as the means to happiness and human dignity. And we can see all of these in sequence in the play. This is really strange. Stephen Greenblatt talks about self-fashioning, but he talks mainly in terms of dress, manners, and speaking. And this it's a valid notion, but self-fashioning in a real Renaissance sense is a self-fashioning of virtue. You've got to be a virtuous man. Okay, let's turn now to skipped over here. And structure of the play. This play naturally falls into 4 parts. Taming the Shrew. Part 1 consists of the induction, 2 scenes which begin the play and have to do with the restoration of Christopher Slot. These scenes are normally cut in production, in dramatic productions and films. Part 2 begins the play proper. 2 young men, Lucentio and Petruchio, come to Padua. They come into contact with 2 sisters, Bianca and Kate. And so you have a clearly balanced plot and subplot, indicating, I think, a deliberate design and parallel. The Italian painters talk about disegno, design and inclusion. In part 3, Petruchio undertakes the courtship and taming of Kate, who is the Shrew in the title. This is intellectually outrageous to modern audiences, but dramatic and comic as well. And finally, part 4 becomes a conclusion consisting of a wager and a submission and a obedience of Kate to Petruchio in wifely obedience. So the induction. The Taming of the Shrew begins then with the induction of two scenes in which a lord comes across the drunken Christopher Sly and decides to practice upon him. The sleeping Sly is described as, quote, one dead or drunk, again, as a monstrous beast, as one like a swine, and as one like grim death. So vice and sin is not an attractive thing in Shakespeare's plays. It's pretty odious. The Lord remarks how foul and loathsome is thy image. A remark that has theological connotations. In other words, sin is like death and disfigures those created in the image of God. So there's a suggestion here of a theological allegory, but it's just a suggestion. I don't think Shakespeare's an allegory in a big way. Oh Lord finds a drunken, sinful mankind, and tries to restore him to his proper self, the image of God, to his proper image. And so our first question is, what about this induction? What does it have to do with the play proper? Introductions, as I said, it's usually dropped as extraneous to the main plot. Crucial to the meaning of the two scenes is the representation of the dramatic process of change. Various critics have characterized it as metamorphosis or transformation. But it is more important to realize that Shakespeare's word is restoration, a slight difference there. Restoring someone to a condition you possessed before from a condition that you're in now. Restoration carries more emphatically theological connotations of a return to a rational or virtuous state from a lost or fallen one. The induction establishes this transformational process at the very beginning of the play. The attempt at Christopher Sly's restoration clearly foreshadows Petruchio's final transformation of the shrewish Kate, a transformation that is clearly parallel to the Lord's efforts to restore the drunken Christopher Sly to his true self. The political moral dimension of this restoration, however, must be taken into consideration. Sly's drunken state and Kate's reformation imply, for example, certain Aristotelian political notions about rule. Both the Lord and Petruchio attempt to break the hold of vice and psychic disorder over their subjects, the one unsuccessfully, the other successfully. The Lord's project with Sly aims to enable him to forget himself. That's Shakespeare's phrase evidently referring to his foul, loathsome, swine-like image, and restore his mind by helping him recover a sense of himself, his true self, and convincing him that he's a mighty Lord. The monstrous beast who is, quote, infused with so foul a spirit is to be restored. Not transformed exactly, to the state of a mighty man of high esteem, just as the shrewish Kate, once Petruchio has politically begun his reign, as Shakespeare says, is restored to the proper dignity of her new-built virtue and obedience. That's a phrase also that's usually struck out of productions. Virtue these days is odious, as Max Shaler pointed out in the early part of this century, the great Catholic philosopher Max Shaler. So her new-built virtue and obedience, that's a key phrase. In this therapeutic practice and political moral design, both men resemble Aristotle's architecton, described in politics as the master builder or ruler who must have moral virtue in its entirety. His function is, in its fullest sense, that of a master craftsman, and reason is a master craftsman, says Aristotle. The Lord and Petruchio are architects of virtue, rational builders of personal and domestic well-being and human dignity. In terms of thematic significance, then, the induction enacts in playful and sporting fashion an attempt at restoration of virtue and human dignity. The Lord's practice on the drunken Christopher Sly, providing us with an introductory parallel to Petruchio's comic and farcical taming of Kate. The audience is clearly not to take this taming in earnest as a literal method of education and wife taming. He's not. This introduction all kind of softens the whole notion of taming. It's not exactly taming; it's a restoration. Taming is a bit crude and a bit harsh. The nature and virtue of the dignity of man were common topics in the Renaissance, particularly with Cicero, Marsilio Ficino, Giovanni di Mirandola, and others. Shrew puts it concisely, but it is essential to every inquiry about duty that we keep before our eyes how far superior man is by nature to cattle and other beasts. From this we see that sensual pleasure is quite unworthy of the dignity of man, and that we ought to despise it and cast it from us. And if we will only bear in mind the superiority and dignity of our nature, we shall realize how wrong it is to abandon ourselves to excess and to live in luxury to lovelessness, and how right it is to live in thrift, self-denial, simplicity, and sobriety. By contrast with the Renaissance humanists, as Paul Aristotle has pointed out, Luther and Calvin represent the opposite notion of the utter sinfulness, depravity, and hopelessness of fallen man, restored only by grace. Calvin, for example, says that, quote, "It is right to declare that man, because of his vitiated nature, is naturally abominable to God. It is also proper to say that man is naturally depraved and faulty." So, although God created human nature, man through sin has vitiated it. Richard Hooker, the great 16th century English theologian, follows suit. He says, quote, "Freedom of operation we have by nature, but the ability of virtuous operation by grace. Because through sin our nature has taken that disease and weakness, whereby of itself it inclineth to only unto evil. It inclines only by nature incline only unto evil." The virtue and human dignity, then, are not extolled in 16th century Protestant theology. On the other hand, in Catholic theology, human nature is never completely diminished or destroyed. Aquinas says the good of nature that is diminished by sin is the natural inclination to virtue, which is befitting to man from the very fact that he's a rational being. For it is due to this that he performs actions in accord with reason, which is to act virtuously. Now, sin cannot entirely take away from man the fact that he's a rational being, for then he would no longer be capable of sin, free will. Wherefore, it is not possible for this good of nature to be destroyed entirely. So there's a huge difference here between Calvin, Hooker, and St. Thomas Aquinas. Furthermore, Augustine and Aquinas maintain that in the rational creature, the image of God is found in the mind. And so when the Lord tries to reframe the mind of Christopher Sly, he's dealing in Aristotelian and Augustinian terminology. In some, the induction presents an action replete with Catholic overtones. A mighty Lord attempts to use arts to restore the drunken Christopher Sly in his mind to a sense of himself as a mighty Lord. In the words of Augustine and Aquinas, as a rational creature made in the image of God. With the commencement of the play proper, we're rapidly introducing parallel plots involving Lucentio and Petruchio. The grim death of Sly's drunkenness with the implied failure of his moral restoration is replaced by the ethical theme of the quest for happiness and virtue. Again, a notion of very precise Aristotelian overtones. The young Lucentio comes to Padua with great enthusiasm. Great enthusiasm to study moral philosophy, that is, to study virtue as the means of happiness. The unmistakable allusion is to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, chapter 1, paragraph 1, not at all surprising in such a Paduan setting, since Padua was a center of Aristotelian studies and popular with the English on the Grand Tour. So Lucentio's first words are very significant. Here let us breathe and happily institute a course of learning and ingenious studies. Therefore, Tranio, for the time I studied virtue, and that part of philosophy will I apply to treats of happiness by virtue, especially to be achieved. That's a very precise description of the opening of the Nicomachean Ethics and the basic notion of Aristotle. He asks the fundamental question: what is it for all men desire? And his answer is not power, not pleasure, but it is happiness. What is happiness? It's achieved through virtue, and it gets into the various virtues in ethics. In its definition, ethics is a part of philosophy, and it's grasped in the opening chapter of the Ethics. This is is a very precise allusion. So to Intronio's remark following, let's be no Stoics. That is, let's not be too restrained and abstemious. Let's allow for the passions, unlike the Stoics who advocate their eradication. But the larger ramification of these minds lies in their establishment of the telos, the aim and the end, and the purpose of the play as happiness. Happiness in love and happiness in marriage for young men. In any event, the rustic Petruchio comes to Padua to wive it wealthily. And money. And so the opening scenes primarily deal with a counterpointing contrast between the two men. The elaborate nature of the contrast, the two young men coming to Padua with two servants and wooing two sisters, indicates a deliberate design, but its significance at this point is not fully clear. Certainly, as I've said, it reflects the full range of possible components in the Aristotelian household economy, with master and servant, father and child, husband and wife. And last but not least, the acquisition of wealth. There is, however, another moral concern much more fundamental to the two plots. We move from the dignity of man with the Lord and Christopher Sly to the quest for happiness with Lucentio and Petruchio, and then to the passions with the two sisters, Kate and Bianca. The contrast between the two sisters serves to clarify, again, the overall design. In themselves, the two sisters, Bianca and Kate, are initially presented in dramatic contrast as two objects of love, one desirable, the other difficult. There are two names suggest this: Bianca, white, and Kate, cat. In more technical, Aristotelian mystic terms, they are the objects of the concupiscible and irascible passions. Sorry to inflict that phraseology on you, but that's the phraseology Aristotle and St. Thomas used. I'll explain what it is briefly. That is, the object of the concupiscible passions is a pleasurable or delightful good. Its desire for the good, the attractive. And the object of the irascible passions is a difficult object. When we first see them, Bianca's mild behavior and sobriety is obviously the foil to Kate's angry and irate discontent. The two sisters elicit concupiscible and irascible passions, or love as a passion and love as a virtuous act of the will, love and election. Lucentio expresses desire and delight in the pursuit of Bianca, and Petruchio manifests bold audacity and relentless will in his pursuit of Kate. Hence, a great point is made of Lucentio's passionate falling in love upon seeing the lovely and apparently docile and sporting point of play, Bianca. See this very, very easily here. He falls in love. Tranio says, I pray, tell me, is it possible that love should of a sudden take such a hold? And Lucentio replied, oh, Tranio, to found it to be true, I never thought it possible or likely. But see, while idly I stood looking on, I found the effect of love and idleness, and now I'm plainness to confess to thee that Artemis, secret and as dear as Anna to the queen of Carthage was, Tranio, I burn, I pine, I perish, Tranio, if I had cheated on this young, modest girl. Obviously, love desires this attractive woman. With Bianca as the object of Lucentio's love and desire, the stage action of Lucentio's rapt gazing on her provides the audience with a striking central image of passionate love, and the ironic allusion to the destructive love of Dido for Aeneas, brought on by the false counsel of her sister Anna, together with Tranio's various remarks suggesting Lucentio's blindness in love, not to mention the plays on the word affect, serve to further establish that love's essentially passionate nature. Thus, the stage is set for what is most striking and most incomparably comic, that is, the other pole of the contrast between the two sisters and the two suitors, Petruchio's audacious choice of the difficult Kate before he even sees her. That's an important thing. This is electing love, not passion. This is will, choice. What Aquinas calls dilectio. And a choice that once again suggestively plays on the notion of affection, which in Petruchio's case is completely and comically subject to rational control and bold, audacious determination, irascible determination to overcome a difficult woman before he even sees her. love as was Florentius's love, as old as Sybil, as cursed and shrewd as Socrates' Antippe, or a worse, she moves me not, no passion, or not removes at least affection's edge in me, is well ironic here. Where she is rough as are the swelling Adriatic seas. I come to wide and wealthily in Padua, if wealthily then happily in Padua. I will not sleep, Hortensio, till I see her. He hasn't even seen her, and he's decided to marry her. Thus, the distinction between love as a passionate and concupiscible desire, and love as a bold determination to overcome the resistance of a difficult woman, is figured forth perfectly. Lucentio falls victim to his eyes of the passion of love, while the forceful Petruchio exercises his will in choosing Kate, albeit in exaggeratedly common fashion. The weakness of Lucentio's initial enthusiastic resolve to study virtue, on merely wishful resolve that collapses immediately under the influence of passion, becomes especially apparent when it's put in contrast with Petruchio's resolute and willful determination to wide and wealthily. The concupiscible and irascible passions best describe the contrast in dynamic actions between the two pairs. In Thomistic terms, what we have here is a contrast between amor and dilexio, between passionate love and elective love. In the opening contrast between Lucentio and Petruchio, then, Shakespeare visually renders forth the essential difference between the concupiscible passion of love and the irascible act of elective, determined choice, and the subsequent plot, again in counterpoint, continues this difference, with Lucentio pursuing Bianca in a clandestine way, and Petruchio in an open manner. The virtue themes continue with a humorous exchange between Petruchio and Baptista, Kate's father, when they first meet. Petruchio remarks, "And you, good sir, have you not a daughter called Caterina, fair and virtuous?" He replies, which Baptista replies, a great one, "I have a daughter, sir, called Catherine." Really well done in the Zeffirelli production of The Taming of the Shrew, Michael Holder. I think that just holds up that line beautifully. And the point is very clear that Kate is anything but virtuous at this point. And so we're led into the third section of the play, the courtship of Taming. If we take the remainder of the play in sections, dividing into three stages, the courtship, taming, and final wager, we can see some additional Aristotelian mystic notions of dramatic operation, virtue mainly, but others as well. In the first stage of the courtship is precisely the opposition between obsequious praise and verbal contentiousness, what Aquinas, following Aristotle, more simply calls flattery and quarreling. Petruchio flatters and Kate quarrels with him. It finds humorous expression with the two lovers. Petruchio outrageously flatters Kate in the interest of winning her for the sake of gain, his primary motive in becoming to Padua being to wipe her wealthfully. His interest in Kate's dowry is transparent, as he says, "Wealth is the burden of my wooing dance." Thus his praise of Kate, in contradiction to the plain fact of her shrewishness, strikes us as blatant and humorous flattery, which, as Aquinas says, has the intention of, quote, St. Thomas, making some gain out of it. And flatter people in order to get something. Kate, in turn, immediately quarrels with him in the interest of resisting his suit, but her verbal contradiction extends even further into the play. So that Petruchio is led to say, "Look, what I speak or do or think to do, you are still crossing it." In any case, she has no hesitancy about being disagreeable in the Aristotelian Thomistic manner, contradicting another's words. Petruchio says, "Come, you wasp, in faith you are too angry." And Kate says, "If I be waspish, best beware my sting." And so she fights back here. As for the second stage of taming, the dominant impression you see of Petruchio in his treatment of Kate is that of a man of firmly benevolent will, not to be moved by self-centered considerations of passion or affection. He says, "Thus, in plain terms, your father has consented that you shall be my wife, your dowry agreed upon. And will you, nill you, I will marry you. For I am born to tame you." We take marriage as a form of friendship, as was the case with certain Renaissance commentators. Furthermore, Shakespearean comedy is usually marked by gratuitous occurrences of good fortune, never more so than with Petruchio's winning of the wager, first set at 100 crowns by Lucentio, then calls for 20 crowns from Kate's delighted father. In all, then, the Aristotelian conception of happiness consists in virtuous behavior, friendship, moderate wealth, and good fortune. And these account for several elements and conclusions of Shakespeare's comedies. If Aristotle's philosophical speculation and Aquinas' beatific vision are noticeably absent, we can attribute their absence to the Renaissance emphasis on the active rather than contemplative life, not to mention the difficulties of representation that both would represent. How you represent philosophical speculation on the stage. It's a non-starter. Or the beatific vision, very difficult. Even Dante has attempted. It is in such a context that Kate's controversial final speech needs to be understood. At this point in the play, just as the architecton Petruchio has brought Kate into harmony with her nature by building her virtue of obedience, she in turn brings to Petruchio in her person all the Aristotelian components of happiness: wealth and good fortune, virtue, friendship, and love, the promise of domestic peace and quiet. To take her speech in an ironic sense, to see it as a protest against male domination, is to impose on it a post-Kantian ideal of the autonomous will freed from nature, tradition, and their limiting horizons, and open only to a world of unlimited and undetermined possibilities. But Shakespeare's world is not that of Emmanuel Kant. The determinations of nature assume great desirability and importance in that world, and rarely more so than in Kate's long and magnificent speech. Domination and mastery are not Shakespeare's words, but the natural relationship that ought to obtain between husband and wife. Rather, awful rule and right supremacy is the phrase given to Petruchio, and it implies a whole host of natural analogical goods. In submission to right supremacy and an honest will, the qualifying words that include an unlimited tyrannical domination and mastery. The rational nature of woman is realized. Her beauty is meant to be heightened by her kindness, her amiability, these are all terms that Kate refers to, her fountain-like power to refresh, while contrariwise, the ruin of that beauty springs from her anger, her scorn, her disordered passion. Likewise, in submission, the subject pays his natural debt to his prince, a payment denied by the rebel and the traitor. And finally, in submission, reason itself brings a number of psychological moral goods: decorum, amiability, calm, a measured self-knowledge. The virtue of obedience at the center of the speech is not the means to a one-sided, despotic, exploitative, or oppressive relationship, but is expressed in the assumption in terms of exchange and mutual benefit. The words are labor, tribute, payment, and debt. In the words of Aristotle, this is not the despotic relationship of master and slave, but the statesman's rule over a free and equal person. And indeed, recognizing in inverse form the evil of despotic domination, the play holds up shrewishness, the feminine form of the will to dominance, as an evil that obstructs natural fulfillment and destroys marital happiness. By the way, the popes are correct, as emphasized the complementarity of the sexes, which is really in harmony with what's being said here in this play. Complementarity rather than opposition. Finally, then, Shakespeare's concern in the Taming of the Shrew is human dignity, the pursuit of happiness, the taming of the passions, and the acquisition of virtue. When we consider the similarity structure between the Catholic Catechism, which Shakespeare could not possibly have read, and the Taming of the Shrew, we can only account for it as founded on the Thomistic tradition common to the Summa Theologica, the Taming of the Shrew, and the Catholic Catechism. And to return to our beginning and what I said about Shakespeare's dramatic aim of holding the mirror up to nature and showing virtue her own feature and scorn her own image, this is precisely what happens in the play. In case of shrewish irascibility, Shakespeare shows us the image of scorn. And in Catherine's wifely obedience, he shows us her virtue's own feature. You get the image. This is something that 16th century Catholics, Protestants, and secularists could have accepted. And it perhaps explains something of Shakespeare's universal appeal. Now, people sometimes, I've run a little experiment. I asked Peter Craig one time, do you think Shakespeare was Catholic? He said, I always assumed he was. And another woman writer came over and asked her the same question. She said, he isn't. So this kind of thing is pretty obvious. I don't think we have to Is Shakespeare Catholic? And Sarah Payton said, "You betcha." Any questions?
Two comments and then a question. First, just about Petruchio's widening wealthily in Padua. It always reminds me of the Marx Brothers, with Groucho pursuing Barbara Dumont. He says, "I don't want to marry you for your money. It's the only way I can think to get my hands on it." The second comment was, I like that you brought up Calvin and Luther's anthropology in contrast to Thomas and Catholic anthropology. And I wonder if at the heart of Shakespeare's thinking about the religious controversies in his age is a rejection of Protestant anthropology as being dangerous, as producing such a negative image of the human person as almost a human person unlovable. And what do you get with, if you think a man is depraved? Well, I think there are two Shakespearean characters who stand out, Richard III and Caliban. They're the two characters who are described as crookback and Caliban is disproportioned in his shape. Well, the word for
bestial, by the way, bestial also. He's described as bestial.
Oh, bestial.
That's the word Aristotle uses to in relation to a deformed nature.
The word depraved comes from pravus, crooked. And you get with Richard III, he's somebody who's literally depraved. Here's your image of Calvinist depravity here. The question I had, though, with him was this. I agree with you that the first scene after the induction, with Lucentio coming to Padua, the great Aristotle, the great center of scholastic thought, to study Aristotle, has situated the play within this Aristotelian ethical tradition, which Thomas builds on it. But that conversation then quickly turns to Ovid, right? And Tranio says, don't forget about Ovid. And Shakespeare is very Ovidian too, clearly. And this is a play where there's some kind of relation that's being established between Aristotle and Ovid. There's not just that conversation, and there's later Lucentio's, he's teaching beyond Ovid, right? Okay, he's incubable and all that, but even that Lord who's restoring Sly, he's got his body pictures of scenes from erotic scenes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And so I guess the question I want to ask then is, what's the relationship in the play between Aristotle and Ovid? And maybe it can even be expanded to something like this. What's the relationship between the philosopher and the poet?
Yeah, these plays are more complex in our understanding of them, so let me emphasize that. Yeah, that's a real problem. The paintings that are shown, that puzzled me. Think about that when I was thinking about that before I came here. But Ovid got a bad press. He's a satirist, but also he was read by certain people, particularly the Art of Love, as a manual for seduction. Okay, so you can play both sides of that coin. I think that Shakespeare realized he was being satirical in the Art of Love, but he has Tranio use it as a young man might use it as a manual to seduce someone. So I think that double-sided image of Ovid is something that plays into the play. Shakespeare is intelligent to pick up that kind of thing. So, a great question. Thank you. Yes.
I would say much more the relation to virtue ethics to virtue. We have example
must have confused by the way they fear man, and think that ought to be something that is anti-feminist. But keep in mind that Shakespeare is very high in women. Kind of irritates me actually, male chauvinist, but the virtue figures in the comedies are always women, never men. So he's very high in women, so he's not denigrating women by any means, I think. Anyone else?
Father, you give a wonderful, you give an excellent analysis of the ethical dimensions of the problems presented by this play. But I think you're leaving out one element of the understanding of heterosexual love, which is also part of the Catholic tradition. I'm thinking of Joseph Pieper's book on love, in which he points out that heterosexual love is grounded not just in the opposition between, not in the opposition between passion and will, but it's grounded in eros. Thought of not as the erotic, but eros as an inherent tendency of the human being to find happiness. And the will comes into play after the eros is activated by mutual attraction. The will comes into play in the vow to make the relationship permanent.
Yeah, that's Catholic tradition. The eros and agape are not opposed, but they're reconcilable. The Pope in his great book, Love and Responsibility, makes the same point. These are levels. But Shakespeare is leading here in dramatic terms. He makes a dramatic composition for aesthetic reasons. He's not, I don't think he's intentionally claiming that the amour and the agape are opposed. So, but that's a really good point to bring up, because the Protestant position with Anders Nyren's famous book, Eros and Agape, opposes